thank you for joining me today. This is the start of a new distillation series. I'm going to be distilling the book How to Think Like a Roman Emperor by Donald Robertson, the Stoic philosophy of Marcus Aurelius. I would just like to add that it's not just about Marcus Aurelius' Stoic philosophy. He also adds in some cognitive behavior therapy pieces to it. So it goes beyond just a simple discussion of Stoicism. Now, before we start, if you'd like to see more videos on Western philosophy, Buddhism, Zen, Taoism, and meditation, can you please do me a favor and just click pause briefly and then hit subscribe and leave a thumbs up and tell a friend if you like the content. Now you've done that, let's get on with the show. So this book is about combining the psychological approach of cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT, with the philosophy called Stoicism. And we're going to approach that through the lens of the philosopher emperor Marcus Aurelius. It is not simply a translation of the Meditations. It doesn't contain the full text of the Meditations at all, by the way. With Stoicism, the author, Donald Robertson, who's a psychologist and an expert on Marcus Aurelius, he shows how we can have greater integrity, emotional resilience, and character. The Stoics can teach us how to obtain our life's purpose, face up to adversity, limit desire, squelch anger, find joy healthfully, face pain and our anxieties, cope with loss, and confront it. Now, the introduction places us with Robertson, reflecting back on his life. In his teens, his father died, and he didn't take it well, and his life felt like a mess. His father was a manual laborer with barely any money to get through the day. But his father didn't really think much of money, and in fact refused a bequest from his friend when his friend died, and he said that money couldn't buy happiness. Robertson found a scrap of paper in his deceased father's wallet that turned out to be a quote that was used as part of the initiation to the Freemasons. And 4 of the tenets of Freemasonry are prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. And those tenets his father took pretty seriously. Now, those tenets could just be deemed to be concepts of a philosophy, but his father looked to them as more of a way of life, which was a much older way of viewing philosophy. Philosophy wasn't something that you'd merely ruminate about, but it was how you would live. That moment kicked Robertson into diving into philosophy. He was experiencing existential angst, which has a tendency for some people to drive them into the hands of a philosophical exploration. He studied philosophical and religious texts for guidance. He found Socrates, who treated philosophy as a kind of psychotherapy. Socrates emphasized values, specifically placing wisdom and virtue above everything. But the problem with Socrates and the method that he uses, just questioning everything, is that it doesn't yield any answers on how to have a practical philosophy of life. However, Socrates gave Robertson a starting point, and he began a study of philosophy at the university, but for him it ended up seeming too abstract and disconnected from putting philosophy into practice. So he turned to psychology instead, focusing on cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT, which seeks to apply our rational side of our mind to our emotions. The thing is, it's a kind of short-term therapy rather than something that you'd use through your entire course of your life. And as a psychotherapist, then Robertson noticed that many of his depressed or anxious clients benefited once they acknowledged their suffering arose from their underlying values. So, for example, if someone suffered from social anxiety disorder, they would value other people's negative opinions of them. Conversely, if they did not value other people's opinions of them, they'd be unlikely to suffer from social anxiety. So what he sought to wed was the psychological toolbox of CBT with the philosophy of Socrates, which emphasizes values. And then he found Stoicism, which had long had practical applications of philosophy through the development of virtues, as well as psychological exercises. And in fact, some of the exercises would be akin to what you'd use in modern therapy. And in fact, rational emotive behavioral therapy, which was the predecessor to CBT, had Stoicism as its philosophical underpinning. So essentially, CBT, if you dig in deep enough, Stoicism is its underpinning as well. As to why Robertson used Marcus Aurelius as the basis for his text, he found he was the best to use as a Stoic role model. There are a number of stories and documents about Marcus Aurelius, since he was a Roman emperor, and we have notes about his practices in his meditations. Now, Robertson's book isn't solely about the meditations. He uses multiple sources, and sometimes he had to interpolate to make the story congeal better. While the book follows Marcus's journey with Stoicism, Robertson integrates it with CBT using concepts like functional analysis, where you'd examine the results of possible courses of action, and cognitive distancing, where you're recognizing that thoughts are not our external reality. Now, since CBT was inspired in part by Stoicism, there are going to be some commonalities, and he believed that CBT and Stoicism can be a way of life, which, when combined, used as a long-term preventative approach. A couple notes before we wrap up. First of all, you can get the meditations for free off of Project Gutenberg, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. It is an older translation. You don't have to read the meditations, but there's certainly no harm in doing so if you want to follow along with this. Another thing is that a text like this does run the risk sometimes of lionizing or idolizing Marcus Aurelius a little bit much. I think you can find a balanced view of Marcus Aurelius's life in the BBC program In Our Time, and I'll also leave a link to that in the description. And a caveat here, what kind of lawyer would I be without issuing a caveat with every paragraph? You should consult with a mental health professional if you're in a situation where you think you need some help. What I'm presenting here only distills down Robertson's text. Your situation might require the assistance of a medical or mental health professional. And you should consult with a mental health professional before embarking on a new path of mental exploration. What you may find here could conflict with advice from your mental health professional or your physician. Just make sure they're aware of your exploration, especially as you're kind of seeking therapy on your own through Stoicism and this combination with CBT. The next part of the book is actually the first formal chapter and actually starts out with the end of Marcus's life. So please be on the lookout for that. I hope to have that out shortly. There's a lot more content in that, practically double the amount of information I presented here. I hope you do get a lot of value out of this distillation as well as others in the series. I do other distillations, like I already have one ongoing, one Zen training by Sakita. I plan to do many more distillations, whether on Western philosophy, Buddhism, Taoism, or other areas that I find interesting and I think you guys might find useful. With that, I'll bid you farewell and have a fantastic day, and thanks for joining Sloppy Zen. Until next time. However, Socrates gave really